Hello, good morning. Warm good morning to every one of you. And we are here for the first session of the Drawing Board Lecture Series 2021. I, Professor Mahesh Bangad, welcome you on behalf of the Drawing Board team. It's a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this year's Drawing Board Lecture Series as well as the competition by itself. And I take immense pleasure to tell you about this initiative. The Drawing Board, as you know, is an international architecture platform based in India, where students can test their understanding and skills in shaping the way the communities live, thrive, while preserving our local heritage, traditions, and activities. It was conceptualized by Mindspace Architects and Rohan Builders in 2016, and it provides a platform to the students to deal with real-life challenges and design challenges in real locations as well. The opportunity lies in an academic exploration in designing for activities that are human and through empathy. The endeavor is to create a unique space for conversations and to bring together students, professionals, and ideas on a common platform. It helps instigate thoughtful research by design by suggesting tangible issues on architecture and context with each cycle. Hosted annually once in the Oxford of the East Pune city, the competition finale itself is one-day gala affair where eminent jury members from different countries guide students and eventually help them become the star architects that we want them to be. Unfortunately, this year too, the times have been testing, and due to the pandemic that has affected all of us, we had to go online, and the 6th edition is being hosted virtually. The lecture series will be hosted virtually as well as the finale on the 24th, and we would appreciate to have all of you join on all 3 days of the lecture series and on the 24th for the whole day gala event where 9 shortlisted entries will be presenting their work. With this, we are also hopeful that in the coming year, the next year, the 7th edition would be bigger and also in person. I would quickly tell you about the partners for the TDB. We have been lucky to have received unending support from the fraternity, and we are extremely thankful to all our ecosystem partners. I would like to thank all our partners for this edition of the Drawing Board 2021, and I would like to start with thanking Mashal NGO and the contribution of our beloved mentor, late architect Sharad Mahajan. It was unfortunate, and it is unfortunate that he is not with us today, and I'm sure if he would have been around, he would have been very happy to see the kind of response the Drawing Board has received. I would like to thank Amazing Architecture, the Levadis, Archivoice, Competitions Archie.Archi, Architecture Live, and also Archi Diaries. I'll quickly tell you about the TDB 2021 challenge. I'm not going to detail out that the brief to you all, as you are already aware about the whereabouts. This year's challenge was about understanding and taking pride in Maharashtra's 800-year-old tradition called the Wari, which involves a journey to the significant place of religious importance from one to another. Rohan Builders and Mindspace Architects are known to contribute through design and build initiatives that are pro-society, and like each year, they have taken up the relevant issue of providing facilities for these Warkaris as the brief for the 6th edition of the Drawing Board. The intent of the organizers was clear: to give the students the necessary exposure and opportunity to deal with real-life scenario and explore design solutions that could solve the long-term problems while designing with empathy. The Drawing Board 2021 has received a tremendous response this year too. Congratulations to all the finalists, and a thank you to all the 700 plus students who registered from 20 plus countries across the world. What has made it even more special is the jury members we have this year. I take this opportunity to thank each one of them for having been so kind to agree to evaluate these many entries and do justice to all of them. Thank you, Architect Rupali Gupte, Architect Neil Kanchaya, and Architect Peter Sachbari. The TBD lecture series. With the objective of doing more for the students and providing them better insights into the architectural works of our jurors, we decided to launch the Drawing Board lecture series last year. We've requested each of our 3 jury members to talk to you and make presentations that will present their journey and their inspirational work to all of you. We at TDB are really obliged to have each one of you being part of this and agree to do so. Thus, without wasting much time, I would like to introduce to all of you the first speaker of our lecture series, Architect Rupali Gupte. Architect Rupali Gupte is an architect, urbanist, and artist based in Mumbai, and also an associate professor at the School of Environment and Architecture, C. Much of her work involves extensive research on contemporary Indian urbanism with a focus on architecture and the built environment, tactical practices, housing, and urban form. In 2003, she co-founded an urban research network called as CRIT, the Collective Research Initiatives Trust. In 2013, she co-founded the School of Environment and Architecture, C, in Mumbai. She is also a partner at the BARD Studio. Welcome, ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you here. And before we start with your presentation, I just have a quick question for you to get the presentation going. You have been teaching for quite some time now, and I'm sure you have had the opportunity to interact with these young minds who are bubbling with creative energy. Can you tell us what is the future of classroom learning in conjunction with the growing number of competitions that you see that the students can take part in? How do we strike a balance and where do we take this forward?
Thanks so much, Mahesh. I think really thanks for this invitation to everyone here. So happy to be here. To kind of follow up your question, and one of the things that even this pandemic is actually showing us, the form that we are meeting in here, and the growing participation of students in this competition also, in some ways, is showing us that this is a time when we are changing in many ways. Also this kind of large digital presence, and super exposure that we are getting in many ways, students are getting in many ways. Students are becoming autodidacts, and this is a very important, there's the philosopher Rancière sort of spoke about this, the idea of the autodidact who's, able to learn by themselves. And so I think what we need to do then is shift the classroom from this idea of an instructional teaching to really sort of opening up minds, opening up ways of seeing. So I think, and the pandemic has shown us that there are so many different forms of the classroom that are possible, So I think that's something that even at the School of Environment and Architecture, where I teach, which we co-founded in 2014, we're trying to kind of look at what does it mean to kind of, change that classroom in many ways, where students are partners in thinking with us. So I think that's where it's going. And this is really encouraging to see multiple platforms like this emerging to do that.
Yes, I think it's also essential to understand that knowledge is available as a pool right now, and it's up to the students to pick up whatever they like to choose. I think this was already there, but the pandemic has allowed us to explore more ways, like you said. And I think your presentation today is going to guide us further into why all of this research is so important for the students to delve into and then take it forward as architects, as designers who are going to contribute to the change of the society. So without further ado, I would request you to kindly start with your presentation and guide us through.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just share my presentation. So the presentation today is called Architecture of Transactional Capacities. And I think like what I would like to say is that this lecture is more about ways of seeing architecture, cities and space rather than discussing projects. And I think that is very important for us in terms of thinking of how do you frame things, what is it, where is it that we are going towards? And in this process, what I'll do is I'll kind of also discuss some of our own works, our multidisciplinary works from BARD Studio, but more again as kind of demonstrations to the conceptual ideas that we are opening up here. Also because, and this is something that I think is very important for students to understand, that you need to look at your practice as a practice, where projects become small moments in a long durée practice of thinking and making. And so what I want to kind of also open up is ways of thinking. And these are 4 terms that we've been kind of evolving to think of architecture and urban form through. small forces, transactional capacities, settling, and trips and kicks. I'll slowly get into each of those. And I hope that, through the introduction of these terms, students get a kind of conceptual device, a metric, I would say, to think and evaluate architecture, that would then inform their own projects. So with that, I'd kind of like to slowly open up each of those terms. The first contention is that cities are shaped by small forces. It's friendships, compassion, solidarities that make space. Okay, and this is Henry Lefebvre, an important theorist, has said that space is produced. It's not a given, but it's produced by series of practices. So, and this is a very telling image. There is this a wall where these children are kind of climbing onto. The wall has now become a playground, and there's this kind of atmosphere of adventure, which is holding this idea of friendships, of solidarities together. Okay, a magical space almost that kind of forms a city space. Or then this one where there's an infrastructure project, there is a bridge, and there is a picnic happening on it. Again, and there's a magic through which city space is made, architectural space is made. And this is actually the contention that, however, our tools of understanding cities, architecture, and space have been limited, and they're limited to cartography, maps, statistics, standards, which in many ways are reductive in the ways they understand life. Okay. So let me just demonstrate that a little bit. So this is, and I'm going to a lot of the notes are from Mumbai because that's where I am based and that's where my research is based. But in some ways, it will also help you to reflect on, because I know students are from all over the country, and it will also be useful for you to reflect on your own context from here, okay? Because these are more methods of thinking. So again, this is the development plan of Mumbai. And again, if you look at it's a cartographic sort of lens, and you see that, typically in a map like this, what is it? You have series of lines that make buildings, plot boundaries, road edges. However, when you go into when you tell the story of the city, actually, these single lines that appear like, just kind of crisp entities really are not that thin. They thicken and they show complex occupancies. So again, that's the thickness. This line is a corroded line. It's a blurred line. And so this is what that line becomes. So this is typically a chawl in Mumbai. So you'll find that the chawl is here. There is a shop below. But there is a kind of pavement in the front where hawkers sort of locate their wares. But between that, there is this idea of a shop which is only 1 foot thick. It's a kind of space that is occupying only 1 foot thickness, but it's a full occupancy, and it is a shop which negotiates with the shop behind. Sometimes it's a kinship relationship. Sometimes it's a nominal rent that is paid. But this thickness is really what constitutes that thin line that you otherwise saw on the map, which is impossible to understand through that cartographic lens. And so, this is a contention that we've kind of look at this idea that you need to then think of tools which are beyond cartographies and standards and statistics to start looking at stories and glossaries that kind of open up the complexities of looking at cities. Okay. So that's again a map that shows the 5 layers and series of stories that open up that, for example, some of the wares in this place are stored in some of the houses above. And so there's a kind of complex relationship that gets established between all the different layers. Or then this one, which is a chawl in Mumbai. This is in Parel. And again, statistically speaking, this is 20% of the city lives like this. And if we look at how this statistics is mobilized, so in the census document, it says 57% people live in 1-room tenements. Now, what does that statistic do? That statistic creates a demand. Okay, it creates a demand which then says, okay, so you need more space. And so what you do is automatically increase the FSI. Okay. And moment you increase the FSI, there is no qualitative dimension to it. There is no understanding of what that space really is. And so then you kind of land up forming spaces which are qualitatively very different. But if you look at that particular one room tenement, which is this over here that you have, you start analyzing the form of that development, you start realizing that the house is really not, only in that propertied space that is quantified, but the home is happening in more places than the house. So you cannot conflate the idea of the house and the home. The home is much more than the houses. Okay, and let me demonstrate that. So this is Poonawalla Chawl in Parel in Mumbai, and the house is actually really small. It's this small one room tenement, but the urban form of it, is actually quite interesting, that there are doors on either sides of it. And in some ways it forms it's a porous house. Okay, there is a corridor on one side, there is a corridor on the other side, and you can actually walk through and through the space. That's the corridor on one side. And then this is actually quite interesting. I'll just go back once. So if you see this, this is the kind of, these are bridges over here that sort of link these two bars. And these bridges are places that you'll find a lot of people spending time, particularly the old, spend a lot of time in these places. And that's what you're seeing, the bridge that is occupied by more than one family. And then there's all kinds of furniture that is sort of lying around this place. We call it orphan furniture because sometimes this furniture is lying around for so long that nobody knows who it belongs to and starts getting claimed by everyone. So in some ways it becomes the commons. And then this is really kind of, if you see this house, so this is a house where this old couple has been living here for ages. And this old gentleman over here has been ill for a long time. The reason why they're able to live in this space like that is because this house is porous. You have people, walking in and out, waving out to them from outside. And this is a very interesting detail. So you see this is the kitchen cabinet, that where the door in some ways closes both the living room space and the kitchen space, which is both used as a multi-purpose space, as well as the kitchen cabinet. So at different times you can close different things, which means that at other times that other spaces is kept open. And the same detail is also on the outer facade. So you'll see that this kitchen cabinet is closed at one point, and in the night the same shutter goes and closes the main door. Okay, which means that through the day the door is kept open. There's very interesting, the artist Duchamp had also a similar detail that he had done, where two rooms can be closed by the same door. And here you're seeing everyday people, designing a door almost like a Duchampian door without ever having this knowledge of art. And so that porous house is really, this is what happens on the bridges. You have people kind of spending a lot of time here. And the whole chawl in some ways becomes one big house, So otherwise, the propertied idea of the house is just that one small thing here, but the home is this entire thing. And that is really something that is important to understand, because in the, so for example, in developed countries, where we call them as welfare states, you find that you have social security that is, provided by the state. But here, in times when we do not have social security, the house form, the urban form, is something that provides that social security. And that is something that we really need to understand as designers. And so similarly, if you look at in Dharavi, the Kumbharwada had a similar form, a porous house again, where you have a interesting section like that. There is a road outside. There is a place where the shop is on the outside here. At the back, there is a place where you make the pots are made, and there's a place at the back where they are burnt. And then the space above also becomes then a living space and a storage space. So again, the urban form is what is interesting, right? Like this idea of the porous form, which creates this kind of public space as a spine that sort of runs through it. Again, another interesting example, completely self-built. This is in Behrampada in Mumbai. And it is a multi-level self-built settlement. And let us look at the section. Okay, again, built by people themselves. There is a grocery shop below. On the top is a place where there's an embroidery making unit. A lot of this material is exported. There is a workers' dorm above, and then this owner lives above. Right behind, you'll find that there is a space which rents out a place for utensils that used for making biryanis and other things for large festivals. These vessels are so large that it's impossible to keep them in your houses, and so it's a communal place almost, where you rent out your kitchen utensils. And then again, another embroidery unit above, and then a kind of space above, which is the library, and then a prayer hall and a community space, all of it in this one space. Okay. On the other hand, and this is the contrast, where you see spaces like this are resettled in colonies like this. This is in Mankurd. And you'll see that there is, on the one hand, where you saw so much interaction happening on one side, there's absolutely none happening here. And I'll come to this. This is what we call transactional capacities. I'll just come to this in the next slide. But look at this image. This is housing, which is built, which is completely legal. Okay. But what it does is that it kind of relaxes all the bylaws which allow light and ventilation into these places, just because it is provided as free housing, so-called. And this actually in Mankur, this place has now become a hotbed for tuberculosis. Okay, this is the highest number of cases in the city are now in Mankur because of this urban form that has evolved. It's criminal almost, huh? And then again, there's our other SRA projects, where you do not find that space that we saw in the self-built settlement, the kind of spaces that evolved, none of them exist over here. Okay, again, it's purely a space which is a kind of compensation of area without making a home. Okay, and one of the contentions is that what this is doing is that it is also increasing polarity in society, high polarities in sort of in kind of social space. So this is what actually some of the chawls that you saw, which where there were bridges, where the whole space actually became one home, is now being redeveloped into something like this, which is parking below, the spaces above. And this, I think that's the contention, that this is coming out of a pure translation into regulations, okay, rather than looking at urban life. And that's really something that we need to take very, very seriously. So that's really what you're seeing. You're seeing that this space below these stalls are now turning into spaces like this, completely disconnected from the ground, completely disconnected from any form of lived spaces that were culturally formed in the city. Or then, yeah, this one, which is, the regulation that is creating this kind of urban form. So this is where we come to the term transactional capacities. And I think this will become very useful for students to evaluate architecture with. Okay, and so that's what we're saying is transactional capacities are formed out of all of these things: densities, number of activities, the networks that they're able to generate, the number of transactions, the number of care enterprises, the number of livelihoods, cultural settings, security. Also, there's safe spaces, so security, but also social security, accommodation of diversity. You saw in that section the number of different things that existed in one place, right? But also a kind of space of multiple imaginations, right? And this is again Gaston Bachelard, a very important theorist who's written this super important book called Poetics of Space, talks about the idea of the imagination. And he talks about the fact that the home should become a space that shelters daydreaming. Okay, so transactional capacities is about all of this. So for you as students, I think what will be important is to see how much of this, how is really kind of the space that you're designing, providing transactional capacities, and really your job should be about increasing those transactional capacities in forms of living, right? So this graph actually shows that from the incremental settlements that we saw to these skyscraping apartments that kind of become, that we are seeing more and more in terms of urban renewal, we see that transactional capacities are very high on one axis and they start reducing on the other axis, whereas the resources that they consume become higher on one axis and are actually much lower on the other axis. But again, like we saw in the first map, that this degree of blur that kind of causes, allows for a kind of sociability is reducing. That blur is reducing. You have more and more compound walls, more and more interiorized kind of ways of living, which is decreasing the blur, but also increasing very, very high polarities. Okay, so I think that is this graph will become important for you to think through. On this axis, where does your design sort of get located? Does it provide high transactional capacities? Is it resource intensive? Does it allow for a kind of blurred form to happen? So I think this will be important for us to think of as a device to evaluate. Okay. Now, so that's the kind of energy. The transactional capacities has a kind of form. It provides a kind of space of energy. It provides a kind of convivial space in cities, and you can see it. You can feel it. There is an atmosphere that gets created through when transactional capacities are high. So that's the term. The second term, okay, so we just kind of, from transactional capacities, we go on to looking at transactional objects. Okay, this is something that we were doing at Bard Studio in our own practice. We were looking at transactional objects in cities. So for example, this vendor who uses a fence in a private building to store her wares, the fence which otherwise kind of separates the inside and the outside, boundary walls which also make city spaces very, very unsafe in many ways, because they cut all kinds of eyes on the street in Jane Jacobs terms. And so what this vendor is doing is actually kind of creating a transactional object by removing that little one grill and sort of inserting the shop within this fence. And then, of course, this is the image that I showed you before. It's also a transactional object. And this series of what we call 1 foot shops, where there is 1 foot inside and 1 foot outside, kind of located in the city space, or this is the central one, which is a typist shop and a lawyer shop, one inside the other. Again, a cartographic map is unable to understand it, because what you would otherwise see is a single line, but here there is one nestled inside another, right? Or this idea of a staircase, a shop under a staircase, or this 1 foot shop in the inner city in Mumbai, or then the cupboard shop. So this was again more a provocation. So we were invited to the Venice Biennale and by one of the first Black curators, Okwi Envisor, and his provocation to everyone was called "Of All the World's Futures." So what we said is that the future is not something that is out there, but it is the next step that these transactional objects will take to, in some ways, satisfy one other aspiration or a desire, right? So it's a next step that transactional spaces or transactional objects in cities take. So this is again a provocative work. These are architectural sculptures where that 1 foot shop becomes, in some ways, adds to its multiplicity. So these are arms that kind of open up, larger. They kind of also open up in much more complex ways to create more occupancies, multiple occupancies. Or then this one, which is a day and night 1 foot shop. So you can see this, right? When the shutter closes, the night shop takes over. So again, a kind of provocative piece which says, it's a 6-inch day shop and a 6-inch night shop. And then the other one is again a kind of 1 foot shop with these pokey things where you can hang your things. Again, series of provocations to think of urban spaces or transactional spaces through. Or this one where the vendor sort of locating, the shop actually occupies very little city space. So it's just kind of, located at a point. It sort of touches the city only at one point. So we made this device which was, touches the city at 3 points and something that can be rolled away when required, when there's a raid or other things. and yeah, series of transactional objects that were already in the city everywhere that we started documenting. This is at a naka, at the node where plumbers and carpenters are sort of selling their wares in these kind of box shops. So again, what we did as a transactional object is made a toolbox, which could perch itself right next to this, next to these wares. Or then people who are occupying the city at another transcendental level, where the transactions are not necessarily monetary transactions. So this person is actually sitting on a high chair where there's a road under construction, almost sort of not minding the construction below, oblivious of it, sitting above. So again, a kind of work that this is an architectural sculpture again, which is called the astrologer's chair, where you sit high up above the city, kind of watching the city go by. And you find a lot of people kind of doing that in cities, that becomes their engagement with cities. Or then a staircase shop, and the shop under the staircase, again, other provocational works. The basket shop, so these are porters in the inner city, and their only device is this basket. They kind of help people port things from here to there, transport goods, but in the afternoons you'll find that they kind of also nap in that little basket. So again, a kind of the next step that the transaction object took is that it made it slightly bigger and made it slightly more comfortable to sleep, a basket bed. So again, provocational works. We come to another work that kind of also mobilizes this idea of transaction and transactional spaces. But another term that I want to introduce is this idea of settling. Okay, that cities settle. Cities are not projects, that they settle slowly out of deep sort of relationships. And again, that's something that one has to be mindful of. So when we spoke about these four layers are also formed out of settling, that kind of that where different occupancies negotiate with each other to create this kind of deep relationship. Okay, or then when this infrastructure project is being built, you find that this kind of project, the infrastructure, this bridge now in Mumbai is dismantled. But I think what is important to understand is that when this infrastructure project was built, it was kind of also built for a kind of efficient movement from point A to point B, but people start occupying it very differently. So you start seeing, that the occupancy below the bridge, or then we saw this before, the small forces that form the city, a picnic happening on the skywalk, or the space below the skywalk starting to get populated. So again, as architects, could we think of in some ways increasing the transactional capacities of infrastructure that is otherwise only thought of through the frameworks of efficiency, because efficiency otherwise becomes the framework through which we think. Is it possible to, in some ways, make that elastic, increase the transactional capacities of infrastructure, learning from these ways in which people occupy space? Then this one again was an infrastructure project. It's actually a toilet in a self-built settlement formed out of what is called the slum sanitation project, where the World Bank was involved. They involved NGOs in the process, and what actually kind of got built was these large toilet blocks in the slums, in the self-built settlements. But in some ways, again, this was into a project mode, where it looks like there is something that is done, tick mark. It looks like there's a large infrastructure project which is built, which in some ways satisfies the community, works for the community. But what actually happens in the long run is many of these infrastructures break down because, in some ways there is no long-term sort of, investment in maintenance and other things. But a project like this comes from funding paradigms. They come from ways in which something kind of looks good on a brochure, that something is done and sort of, ticked off. On the other hand, things that are invisible. Okay, so at the same time, when a project like that was being done, there was something else happening. The lower level government officials started in some ways upgrading settlements, and this is a project where this self-built settlement in Bhandup, the municipal staff actually works with local contractors to kind of put in a sanitation infrastructure there. There's a pipes that are laid below, and they are kind of taken to people's houses, and people kind of in some ways invest in their houses themselves. Okay, in the individual toilets themselves. And what this does is really makes this settlement into a nice, comfortable settlement. Okay, and you'll see that there are, and what it also does in many ways challenges standards, because something like this would never come up with if you kind of really sort of followed standards. So you have the staircase that leads up. There's actually a toilet, or on that, in that balcony. Then there were also toilets that when people's houses were really small, they were also building toilets outside their houses. So in this settlement, you'll find that these toilets that you see in this are actually people's individual toilets, which the community got together and said, we will assign these places. There were also places where people did not have money for, the tiles. And so everybody donated a tile from their own houses. And the toilet actually became this actually quite a beautiful bricolage made out of multiple tiles. Yeah, that's Sunita. She has a dog, Bruno, and sort of incrementally has built the house. Slowly it is transforming into garden. Once in a while she gets the people to paint this house. She's now due for painting this. But again, look at the standards. The kitchen is small, the toilet is small, but it's possible for her to kind of, live in this house, also incrementally sort of build it herself. And then this is another one, which is again that same sanitation program, but this time there was a caretaker who actually kind of took care of it, slowly settled the place. Okay, so he kind of builds the floor at one time, has this pet rabbit, and keeps kind of incrementally building the space. So at one time we go, there's an air curtain that he brings from his house, and you see that it's kept on this chair. The next time you go, it has a stand, so he's kind of slowly consolidating it and kind of developing it. The next time that you go, there's a garden growing in front of it, and then there's a conference that is happening in his place at one time, where all these contractors, these kind of small contractors have convened for a conference. And one of them actually points out to us this blue house. They said, we built this blue house, and now we've cracked, how much somebody can pay. And the light and ventilation problem is now solved, because now this kind of roof floats above, and we've created this kind of clear story window, where it's possible to get to ventilate this place. So there is slow innovations that are constantly happening, and there is a kind of settling that is happening. Okay, so I think again that's another thing that is important to understand, that things are built incrementally as and when the resources kind of get developed. There is a huge infrastructure in place that kind of facilitates that. As architects, would it be possible to intervene in processes like that, trying to understand how to increase transactional capacities, trying to understand the settling that happens in cities, and in some ways consolidating that, facilitating that, taking it to the next level. The third term, okay? And the third term is this idea of trips and kicks. And again, this is something that we've been working with in our research. We find that cities are made like they're made with small forces. They are made with series of people who are energetic selves, who are in some ways producing that space. So this is a landlord who's actually rented that wall to the shop, and he hangs out outside the shop in this kind of camaraderie, or somebody who kind of collects old computer parts as a specialty, because as computer parts are getting outdated, the old parts become important. So everybody knows this person, Anna, who's in Lamington Road. They'll call him up and ask for an old part. So the trips and kicks of people are actually forming city space. This one was somebody who kind of has a LED shop in Lamington Road, and was fascinated by the Yarana song of Amitabh Bachchan. So kind of, stitches for himself this light suit and walks around Lamington Road in that light suit. And so I think this is one of and of course, all these people have trips and kicks. The one who was, the lower level municipal officials who got into, they had no business. They actually had no money to make in this process, but they got involved, and they produced a space which was actually a nice space for people to live, a habitable space for people to live. The caretaker who keeps kind of working on this. On this last story, I'll tell you about this a trip. This is Pradeep again in Lamington Road. Also, in some ways, a designer in interesting ways. He's a sound mixer. He's somebody who repairs sound mixers. And with globalization, with Chinese goods coming into the market, it's becoming more and more difficult for him to repair because the components are becoming smaller and smaller. So what he does is that this is what he shows us, how the components become small. And what he's done is that he's divided his shop into two parts, where he rents out one part to some friends and makes money out of this, and then retains that other part of the shop. And then in the process, he does, the time that he has, the extra time he does all kinds of things. He shows us this math. He says that, a Marwadi gentleman visited him one day and said, he's a fool to keep that shop in that place of such high real estate. But it is, he says, and he shows us that mathematics, and he says, I know that, but what can I do? I enjoy my work and I enjoy being here. And again, that is something that is important to understand as a metric, that people enjoy spaces, that everything doesn't come out of pure functionality or economics, but it also comes out of the trips and kicks through which people, inhabit city space. And that is again something that is important for us to understand as designers to feed into this our kind of process of thinking. So as he himself is a designer, he does, in his spare time that he now has, he says he has made this most ergonomical chair by kind of creating this lower back support. He creates what he calls a geriatric friendly watch, because he says nobody thinks of how old people are not able to read watches. So he makes this kind of watch, which is a contrast, where he's able to read the watch now, he says. And then he makes these pens, which he says are in disguise. He has these acrylic pieces that are lying around in his shop. He slowly, bends them and sort of heats that, bends it, puts a refill in it. And he says that, why I'm doing this, because when I go to the bank, everybody's stealing my pens. And so I make this pen, which doesn't look like a pen. So he says it's a pen in disguise. And so he's really working like a designer on a trip, and he makes these pens that jingle and brass, made out of brass pipes and other things, and a series of iterations of that. So again, I just want to kind of end with these three things. 4 things actually: small forces that shape city space, transactional capacities that kind of provide the city space with its lived experiences, settling, slow logic of settling in the way city forms its relationships, and the trips and kicks of people through which city space is produced. Okay, so I'll just maybe, because we don't have a lot of time, I'll just show. I had 3 projects, but maybe I'll just show 2. Small projects in some ways, which in some ways mobilize this idea of small forces, transactional capacities, settling, trips and kicks. So this was again in Mankut, that same place that we saw before. This is how the built form was. And if you went to it in 2005, it was something that would have been impossible. It was very, very high, a very high alienating space, because it had not settled. It was a violent space. People didn't know each other. It was very difficult to walk in that space, as opposed to the earlier spaces, which are very safe spaces. Okay, but in the next, this was 2005. So now if you go in 2020, really that space has started consolidating. So this yellow light that you see is a market that is happening on a road, which is otherwise thought of as pure infrastructure, okay, and not through its transactional capacities. But in some ways, people have occupied it and taken over it and made it into a market space. Okay, so designers did not think about it, but people sort of, in some ways reclaimed it. And so again, you can see this high alienation in that kind of built form that evolves, but on the other hand, a fabric that is kind of creating, has that sponge that retains some of the transactional capacities. Or then again, this is people's own attempts in that space which lacks transactional capacities, to start kind of, occupying it, claiming it. So you will find that there is a temple that happens in 2 galas, 2 houses, which are otherwise this 20 square meter is now taken over by a temple somewhere. So we decided again through friends we had in this place, that there was a space that was already claimed. There was a shed in this place that was already claimed by people through certain relationships with the government, etc. So these are all the people who are in that space, who are all these energetic selves who had claimed that space, who were occupying it. We got other people, so in the center is the Sharif Bhai, who's a welder in Kurla. We got him and the carpenters and other people who were in some ways other energetic cells to kind of engage with the space. And then we sort of did this workshop. We involved all kinds of processes of thinking of what this place could become. Again, funding came from a very different source. It was an art project that said, to kind of think of this idea of a public realm. We said, if this public realm doesn't exist, then let's create the infrastructure for a public realm to happen, for transactional capacities to be built. So then, yeah, series of workshops where we kind of, ideated. This was the space. The shed was then taken to the next level. It was kind of upgraded. And you can see that it's a little wedge in that space right next to these towers. That's the space. It says there are few different spaces in that one small space, a multi-purpose space, a library, and a space below, a staircase which is mobile that sort of moves around. That's the space. That's the space. And then, yeah, this material we got from Kurla, which is one of the largest recycling markets in Mumbai. And that's when the shed starts happening. Demolition. Yeah, and series of energetic cells who kind of come into the production of the space. It's called R&R, and there's a pun. It's actually it's a pun on rehabilitation and resettlement, but we call it rest and relax and rock and roll and all kinds of things, because the space became a open script for many things to happen there. And it also got named by this kind of, it was the Neela Darwaza and Sunera Chat. That became the address of the place. So, yeah. And so from the outside, it's kind of almost, untouched. And the roof looks like it floats above it with this kind of yellow light that comes in. The drawings became cards, invitation cards for people to come in. And that was the day of the inauguration. You see that the bench sort of also works from both sides. The space for workshops to happen, and kind of a balcony outside, spaces for addas and kind of conferences. So the furniture starts getting, sometimes the furniture becomes railing, sometimes it becomes a kind of conference table. So also kind of that's where the bench goes up, and that bench is part of the railing space. Or you kind of sit above and you can actually watch from that from the space above. You kind of move the bench and it becomes a balcony space to watch a film being screened. Or then the balwadi that happens in that space, or the crowdsourced library that gets formed in the space, and the library is growing. And so incrementally this space is also kind of constantly growing and building itself. So yeah, so I think I have, maybe I'll just, yeah, it's kind of, so I'll just show one other kind of space, just because I wanted to talk about this idea that transactional capacities are not only utilitarian, but they're also about the imagination. So we were invited again to a place, to Barcelona, to create a house now, a house not for people, but for books, books for children. Okay. And that was the space. It was called the Belly of the Strange. And here the architect is a storyteller. And this kind of space was built for strange books. Okay. Books which are in some ways, strange, and they're kind of wild, and where children don't find it strange. It's the adults who find it strange, because they are so used to normality and standards and kind of a particular trajectory of thinking of life. But children have this wondrous kind of space that they are exposed to. So that was the brief: a transactional space for wondrous books that children read while growing up, books that are unfamiliar, strange, alien, unknown, unexpected, that find themselves in communion with the curious, a space for children, but also for the child in you. So we created this kind of space, which is called the Belly of the Strange. It kind of looks like this large bulbous space, which is growing in that space, anchored against a wall. seems like it's going to burst at any moment. It wraps around the space. And then, it is occupied. There are the books that kind of hang on these pokey things around the surface. Children spend hours actually reading in that space. So yeah, I mean, that actually kind of happened for, and that's, yeah, people actually occupying this. Also for the child in you. So you found people occupying it, almost sort of becoming children in that process. So I just wanted to show this because I wanted to point out that transactional spaces, capacities are not only utilitarian and not only communitarian, but they're also kind of in some ways, also kind of increasing the capacities for imagination, like that wall we saw where the children were occupying it in the beginning, where that single wall became a playground. So I have one more project, but I'm not going to go through it because I don't think we have time. I think it'll be nice to come together for a discussion. So, yeah.
Yes, I was so mesmerized with this whole presentation and the kind of graphics that you showed to us. Actually, we could go for another project, but there are already questions coming in, and I thought those questions could be taken up immediately.
Yeah.
What you showed to us was informative, inspiring, and insightful. To me, largely, it was also about how these transactional spaces and objects actually become the real life of a city and why they are so important. Two questions that we have received are pretty much similar to each other. Rutvik has messaged and Prutha has also sent a question. So Prutha says, is there really a need to formalize these transactional spaces and objects? Because these inserts are anyway the life of a city. Rutvik says, should architects and designers end up creating spaces to accommodate such capacities in terms of social equity, or maybe should they just evolve naturally only?
Okay.
So both are related questions. I thought you could take it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, this is a question that comes up all the time. Okay, but I think this is where you need to think of yourself as, the role of the architect, or who the architect is becomes important to think of. If you don't think of the architect as this expert, but one of these energetic selves, who is participating in life through these logics of small forces, compassions, friendships, and all of that, then you will be one of the facilitators of the small forces, where these spaces are constantly, they're never static, right? They're never static. They're constantly growing, they're constantly evolving, right? And so if you don't think of yourself as an expert, but one of the forces, one of the friends, one of the persons who is kind of, participating in this act of solidarity and compassion, then you become a facilitator in this process.
Yeah.
And then and if your tools don't go through the tools of our own formalized tools, right, which is our ways of thinking of standards and kind of
going through that process,
but you yourself kind of open yourself up to other ways of thinking, that's when you won't land up doing what you're saying in this, but you will actually kind of participate in the magic of the city and of architecture.
So basically, you'll act as a catalyst towards this growth. And I think another question that we got is, how do you see cities moving towards over-urbanization? Are they missing out on these transactional spaces?
Yeah, they are. That's what I was trying to say also, that in some ways, what is happening with urban renewal is that we are increasing our polarities. We are creating more and more compound walled spaces. If we look at our cities, there is I know, like, what is interesting is that people come from diverse places over here, and there's so much variety in the way people live. There's so much interesting urban form, but moment you think of, you move through certain ways of thinking, you reduce what is possible with architecture. Instead of this whole palette that we have of life and living. So I think as architects, we need to kind of bring back or claim all those ways of living, and that's where I want to also say that this idea, and that's why, all of us are kind of involved in thinking of housing, that you cannot conflate house and home. You need to start thinking of how the home as much more, So you may be involved in, the making of a house, but what are the other things that constitute the home? I think that is important for us to think about. Yeah.
Yes, I think city as a house as a city by itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation with one of the conservation architects recently, and he said you should look at the city as a living room by itself, and then you start addressing. I'm going to take a quick comment from Rucha here. I think as a developer perspective, she's put it forward that this gets out an interesting point of view. It will be great exercise to go back at older developments and observe how common spaces provided to housing societies are used, and have they adapted over the period of time, and does that affect all the future quality of spaces offered as well?
Absolutely, that's very important, and I think that is encouraging really to see that the developer is actually involved here, asking questions, and I think this is really sort of the it's important for society to think like that. Like I'll just give you an example, and that is was there in my the third thing that I was also trying to talk about, that if you look at again where our cities are going to, we did an exercise where we saw that in the next 20 years Mumbai is going to become the city of the old, and what happens when it becomes the city of the old? What is the urban form that we're leading to? These towers where people will be trapped into the houses. You don't require larger interior spaces. You require other kinds of spaces where you can be you can participate with a larger community, there is security and all of that we spoke about, right? Now, how do we get this? We can blame, bylaws, but those are the minimum standards, right? Nobody stops us from saying that we can make other kinds of spaces. And I think this is where developers can really play a very important role to start thinking of what is it that constitutes a home. Is it only the house within? And today our imagination is limited because of all the billboards that we see around, all the advertisements that we see around, where the home is only this kind of, prize.
The focus of it, yeah.
It is and it's the status, right? Like you say, this is the house that I have. What do you say? There are all these advertisements that say apartment with no neighbors and all of that. But where is the life in that? In the long run, that's not going to be your life that you are able to sustain even, right? So I think that is a very important role that developers can actually play in completely rethinking the ways in which we understand life and living, and sort of then form space out of it.
Very important. This connect with the community and the society is so very important. And the point you mentioned about, I think you showed a section to us as a part of your presentation where you had a tower and then you had a very small built form abutting it, and that disconnect of that tower from that small built form. But I think when you are connected to the ground, you are more human in terms of your whole lifestyle changes when you are more connected to it. There's another question. While you were dealing with these transactional projects, was there any difficulty in communicating with these people, in conveying the ideas?
No, so I think that this is again, and this is something that we tell our students also, that make friends, and again, because for the longest time, the architect has become this expert who goes into the field with all their knowledge, right? But if you make friends, you start seeing that there are ways of exchanging knowledge, right? And that's where the compassion comes in. So no, there's no difficulty if you make friends.
Yeah, that's very important. I think you should not put yourself on a pedestal. You should try and be one amongst them, which is what you mentioned as well. There's another last question that I would like to take is, and it's very pertaining as well. How do you see as designers we contribute in localities that are tabooed, or could there be a change in terms of such transactional spaces that are taboo in terms of society spaces? How do you make a change as designers?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways to also think of where the taboo has come from, right? Like the taboo is only an outside thing. But when you go in within, and this is where that going into the map, into the corrosion and the porosity becomes important, because moment you go in, there is no taboo. because people are living their lives, right? So what is then the relationship that gets built? It's, how do you kind of change the way you, the space is kind of imagined, right? Like, for example, that one example that I gave you, that slums were seen as these kind of bad places. But moment there was this, simple, it was impossible. There were, there was no way in which that there were no developers coming into the picture, because this was a place which was not a lucrative place for developers. And so moment the infrastructure was put in there, it became a nice place to live, right? And it changed the way it was imagined. So I think I think taboo is only an external thing. It comes from the way you look at it from the outside. But if you look at it as a lived space, there is no taboo.
I think as designers, we should just remove that mental
From
barrier
your
from
own
our
mind,
mind.
actually.
Yeah.
If it goes from your mind, it will go away from many other places.
True, very important. There's a question also. There's a comment first. A lovely presentation. And what was the inspiration? What was your inspiration to choose this language of architecture while dealing with transactional spaces?
So I mean, in some ways, I think we have been evolving this concept of transactional capacities and spaces, because we feel like the metrics that we have today of evaluating architecture in our context in the global south are limited, and so it comes from our own. We're writing a paper on small forces, because I think for the longest time we have always relied on a kind of analysis, whether it's form, space, order, or other things which come from other places. But I think it's important to develop a kind of way of seeing from your own context. And so that's something that we've been developing, and we're testing it out. We test it out in small projects. We test it out with other friends who are, also building projects in their practices. So I think these are more tests for us.
Yeah, and I think because it's more experimentative, you have always new challenges and new ideas to play with. I think there's just one more question that I'll just take quickly, but I think as designers, the role that you are playing currently is more of a socially responsible citizen than just as a pure designer, which is very important. There's a question, and I think this is very pertaining as a student would come to mind, is the anonymous attendee says, yesterday I saw an advertisement in the newspaper about Trump Tower, and they are selling homes and flats under the name of luxury homes. Very tempting in terms of advertisement. What do you suggest to someone like a fourth year student? How do you incorporate today's learning into my own design projects? Yeah. Which I think is a very important way of thinking or looking at things, which if you could guide them on that.
Yeah. So again, I think, there is a hijack of the imagination that has happened, but I don't know. I also think that this is a bubble, because how many of those people are going to be able to afford the Trump Towers? Even if it's speculation, even if you are able to hoard, how much can you hoard, right? And there will be a bubble and it's going to burst one day very soon. And so I think it's time for people to start looking at the other spaces, the actually home as living space, as a kind of lived space, and really participate in that, So I think this is for students, for all of us to kind of think of how do you intervene in that process of completely rethinking, because otherwise the speculative logic has hijacked our imaginations.
You've actually made to think into those lines. Actually, everything that is beautifully presented is nice, is what believed. We'll just take a last question, because there are now many more questions suddenly coming up. But what do you think about the growth of children and people in spaces like Dharavi slum? How do you look at this as the way of living or life?
Yeah. So I think this question, and okay, somebody's also talking about less space.
Less space, ventilation and drainage.
All of those things together. So like I said, that the home happens in more places than that house. And in fact, that's where you find that the redeveloped house is actually much smaller, because it is only kind of looking at compensating for that house. And that house actually, I've seen a lot of these redevelopment projects, they become completely claustrophobic because there is no idea of extensions, right? So I think to think of the house in as a home in its various degrees, that you think of the home itself, you think of the space outside, the neighborhood, the city. I think all of these become important to think of in the idea of extensions of the home. So they are actually, because the redeveloped houses are actually much smaller. They are also kind of very, there are a series of problems also, because moment you think of it only as a bounded property, all kinds of things happen, because it becomes something that you can transact in terms of money. So people land up selling it and going, and in some ways, difficult to maintain also, because they become higher towers, their maintenance rises, all of those happen. So I think it's important to look at the whole ecology of the house, and what does it mean if the house is small? How do you extend the environment of the house, which becomes a much more livable space? I'll just give you one example. When you're talking about small spaces now, in the pandemic, actually kind of visited a friend who lives in one of these tall houses. And again, in the statistic, it said that, the room is one room tenement, and so it should be redeveloped into, it would naturally be redeveloped into those large towers, because that's the market logic that is operating today. But he says, because it has beautiful verandas outside, bridges outside. And he says, I was able to live through this pandemic only because I was in a form like this.
Yes.
Yes. I can't even imagine what will happen if this gets redeveloped into that house, because it will still remain a small house. It will not be a large house. Nobody is generous enough to kind of suddenly give from a small house to a large house. You will still live in that, but you will not have the form of the house that will support life and living. Right?
Yeah, very important, very important. I think with that, we've covered all the questions. Thank you so much for detailing out all the answers to us. And because I think these questions are very important for students to carry forward that empathy into their own design when they move into architectural designing, and when they move into the profession as well. So thank you, Rupali ma'am. It's been wonderful listening to your presentation, seeing the visuals as well, and the takeaway has been wonderful. This is to our audience that we'll be having another session on Wednesday with Neelkant Chaya, one of our other jury member, at 4 p.m. Rupali ma'am, it's great, and we wish you the very best with all the initiatives that CRIT or C or the BART studio is taking. And there are students who are asking me, how do we intern with Rupali ma'am, and how do we apply and stuff. So there are websites you can always log on to and check with them. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure hosting you this morning and learning from you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for inviting me. And yeah, looking forward to the next steps here.
Okay. Lovely.